In this lesson, we'll focus on sketching out the top view design of our game vehicle. So let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so before we begin sketching, I want to go over the dimensions of our canvas really quick. If you go to Image, and then you go to Image Size, and then if you switch from percent to pixels, you can see the dimensions that we have for the width and the height. They're basically the same as what we set up for our entire sprite sheet. So 4096 by 4096. So this is basically the canvas size that I'm going to use for the creation of all of my sprites. If you recall, on our sprite sheet, we set up each one of those little tiles for the grid to be 512 by 512. So eventually, and we'll go over this towards the end of the course, we're going to take each one of these sprites and we're going to resize the canvas down to 512 by 512 and bring those sprites over and place them in their respective tiles accordingly. So we'll go ahead and click the X there. Really quick, if you look over here at the Layers panel, you can see that I've created a layer titled Sketch. So this will be the first layer in the process of constructing our vehicle. So let's go ahead and grab our brush tool over here in the tool panel, and I want to go ahead and set up my brush really quick for sketching. So we can right click anywhere on the canvas, bringing up our brush preset picker. These are just default brush presets that come with Photoshop. I'm going to go with just this hard round brush right here, and I'll jump over to my brush panel really quick. This isn't something you really have to do, but I find that it makes for some nice sketching. I like to turn on Shape Dynamics, and under Shape Dynamics, I like to have the control for size jitter set to pen pressure. This allows me to control the thinness or thickness of my brush tip based off of how much pressure I apply with my Wacom stylus onto my Cintiq screen. Next, I want to turn on Transfer. And under Transfer, I again want to have pen pressure enabled for both of the controls for opacity and flow. This allows me to, again, control the opacity and flow based off of how much pressure I apply with my stylus. So again, you don't really have to do this, but I feel that it makes just for some nice sketching. And I like to choose a color to sketch with, something like a blue. This helps me out later on. When I apply my nice clean black line work, I can differentiate between the sketch and my line work. Okay, so as far as the overall theme of the vehicle, we were thinking of something that a dwarf would drive, right? So something kind of medieval looking, slightly steampunk as well, maybe with some bolts and metal on it. So I like to kind of start out with just a simple shape. So I'm just kind of thinking about the overall hull of the vehicle. And I'm thinking it'll probably be made out of wood or something like that. The center of it will have an opening for our dwarf character to sit in. So as you're creating your vehicle, however you're visualizing it to be, you want to think about the fact that it's ultimately going to be shrunken down, broken down into it's going to be resized down to a very small image, so 512 by 512, okay? And so you want to think about what's going to read well at that small size. So as I sketch this out, I'm trying to think of very distinct shapes that will read well at a small size. So for the top of this hull, I'm kind of thinking that it's made out of wood or something like that, and the back end of it is kind of broken, kind of like these shards of wood sticking out. So it's like they took an old piece of wood for the top of the vehicle and they kind of just haphazardly cut it. We may have like a strip of metal right here with some bolts on it, maybe even a strip of metal kind of around that circular opening where he'll sit in. Again, I'm kind of thinking of this as being kind of a cross between something that feels kind of medieval, maybe kind of slightly steampunk. And now keep in mind, this again is just a sketch. We're just trying to kind of lay down our visual thoughts, our overall idea. This will kind of provide us with a blueprint to basically start placing our clean line work over in the next lesson. So kind of thinking about the rest of the vehicle as far as the sides go, Perhaps we could have like these giant long bones or something like that. Perhaps it's like a dragon bone. So maybe like these long bones coming off the back of the vehicle right here, extending out the front beyond the hull. So something kind of like that. And there might be like some spikes sticking off the back of this bone. So this would be the back of the vehicle right here, okay? So let's say someone's trying to ram him. Well, they've got these spikes right here that might poke into their vehicle, causing some damage or something like that. Again, I'm thinking about very distinct shapes. I'm being very conscious of the overall silhouette of this vehicle, thinking about what it's going to look like at a small size. So it's definitely not a bad idea to kind of zoom out as you kind of sketch out your thoughts here. And then we probably have the wheel, the back wheel. I'd like to kind of have it rather large, kind of thinking of it kind of like a dune buggy. So a really large wheel on the back. Maybe there's some spikes coming out of the wheel. And later on we'll talk about how there'll be different iterations of this vehicle. So we're going to have different versions of this sprite where the tires are going to appear like they're rotating. So we'd probably do another version of these tires after we've applied our clean line work to where the spikes are offset so that when it's cycling through these sprites in the game, it'll look like they're kind of spinning. We may even have like some little blur lines or something like that. What I'm doing now is just taking my lasso tool. I'll select all that information right there. I'll go ahead, right click within that selection, go to layer via copy. Duplicating that, I'll right click again, go to free transform, right click one more time to flip it horizontal and place it right there. And then I'm going to go over here to my layers panel and merge that new layer back down into my sketch. So kind of starting to get this, this visual feel for my vehicle a little bit more clearly. Again, we can also right click to free transform the entire vehicle, and I can kind of start to skew it a little bit more. You do want to make as much use as you can as far as the canvas that you have here. You just don't want anything to go right up to the very edge, touching the edge or going off or anything like that, unless it's meant to encompass the entire tile itself as if it were a track piece or something like that. The reason for this is later on when we create the alphas, that can cause some problems with the sprite. So just kind of taking it up close to the edge, but not touching the edge. So he needs some sort of weapon on the front to fire kind of like a projectile, maybe like some sort of cannonball or something like that. Maybe a cannonball with spikes, since I've already got a few spikes kind of here on our vehicle. So maybe a cannon on the front of it, something like that. May want to kind of modify this back part right here. So again, this is just a very loose, rough sketch, just to kind of nail down our thoughts, if you will. So I'm just kind of moving a few pieces around here, just kind of continuing to refine it. All the while, you know, it's again good idea to kind of continue to think about the overall silhouette that you have here, because this is going to be, again, shrunken down to a small size, and so you want to think about what reads well. So there might be like some flames that kind of come off the backside here. The flames themselves will not be directly a part of the vehicle sprite. They would be their own sprites that would be cycled through, and our game designer Josh would attach those to the vehicle. So kind of in the center of this hull is where our dwarf character would sit. Again, you want to think about what will read well, thinking about distinct shapes. So I'm thinking he might have some sort of helmet, might see like his big nose. I think of dwarves as having big noses. He might have like a beard or something like that kind of coming down. So keeping everything kind of minimalist. If you try to get too detailed, too granular with it, then you run the high risk of it just becoming really muddy and indistinguishable at a smaller size. So for his helmet, I'm thinking he might have like some little horns that stick out or something like that. Might want to go ahead and kind of shrink that down just a little bit there. And we could even take this right here. Might just make it a little bit larger as a whole. And so his body, you know, he's probably wearing some kind of heavy material kind of garment. So this would be kind of like the top part of his shoulders right here. So he's probably got some kind of wool skin, some sort of hide that he's wearing or something like that. So you want to just kind of be mindful of the silhouette, the overall shape of that. You don't want to get too detailed, too granular. We probably have like a steering wheel up here, kind of towards the front. And then his arms would come out right here where he would be grabbing that wheel. And so in the next lesson, we're going to start talking about applying clean line work and breaking up everything into pieces. And so the reason for this is I want the driver or the dwarf here to be its own separate piece, as well as the wheels, the body itself. This will be very beneficial to us as we begin to make different iterations to the vehicle, the wheels, the driver itself. If we want to have different versions of him turning his arms, turning the wheel, we'll be able to do that very easily, having everything broken down into pieces over here in our layers panel. And you'll kind of start to get a sense of how that process is going to go as far as how everything is grouped. So that's what we're going to kind of start to focus on in the next lesson. In between lessons, I'm going to kind of continue on kind of working on this vehicle, just kind of tightening up the sketch overall, just so that you guys can see it with a little bit more clarity before we begin applying our clean, nice, crisp line work. We'll also be talking about, just in regards to the line work, how well that line work will read at a small size, just in regards to the thinness or thickness of those lines. So little things like that we need to consider. Again, this is going to be taken down to a very small size. All right, so stick around and we'll tackle line work and breaking our vehicle into separate pieces in the next lesson.